Gray Zone Warfare has finally released into early access for VIPs, and yesterday I had the opportunity to play it for 10 hours. 7 of those hours I played as a group, primarily in a 4-man squad, the way that the game is intended to be played, but also in some trios and an hour or 2 as duos. I also played about 3 hours of solos just to get the single player experience. After all that, we're going to be going over the good and the bad of the game as it stands right now as I'm playing it. Before I get the comments that say, but Moi, it's an alpha, the devs are going to work on it, they're going to change some things. I'm aware of that. This is my version and my way of giving constructive and pointed, very direct feedback, because I do think that there's important things that need to be said. But most importantly, I feel as if I had played enough of the game to really give an honest review of the game mechanics, the systems, the gameplay, the quest, everything you can do in Gray Zone Warfare at the moment, I've pretty much done. And because of that, I really have a lot to say about Gray Zone Warfare. So I've separated this video down into chapters in case you want to bounce around or reference something at a later time. At the end of the day, I feel as if this game over the past few months has been incredibly hyped up by the community as both the next generation of tactical shooters, but also the next and real Tarkov killer. But now that we actually have our hands on it, and we can see it more than just a small slice of a playtest that creators had about a month ago, does that really hold up? There's a lot to unpack here, so let's just get into it. My biggest concern when I first saw Gray Zone Warfare in the trailer was the optimization and performance. This is being sold as a 40-kilometer square map, and it's open world and persistent, meaning that once you do that initial load, you're loaded. You deploy into the base and you wander around the map. There's no loading screen. Players are jumping in, jumping out. Little birds are flying around. Enemies are shooting at you. Loot is spawning and being looted. How is that going to work without having huge frame drops? Well, in my experience, having a 4080, I was actually above 140 to 150 FPS consistently. I didn't tweak anything in the settings. Whatever the recommended settings that they had for my system was implemented, and I had pretty much no issues whatsoever. The only time that I actually got significant hitches was when I feel like I crossed over into a loading area. From the main base to our initial Little Bird ride to the first village, we had a huge hitch, and after that, it was actually very smooth sailing. And the only other time I had that significant FPS tank was when I went to a separate area a few kilometers away, which I can almost equate to crossing over a server load area. It appears that your player will almost load an area around you, and after that initial load, well, you're kind of good to go. It felt super smooth for me, but I will say players on older cards, especially things in the 2000 series, even if it's a 2070 Super or 2080, we're getting around 50 to 60 FPS, while players who had 3060s to maybe 3080s were anywhere from 60 to 80 FPS. Now, because it's built in UE5 and it is next gen, the map, the world, everything is absolutely gorgeous when you actually load into Gray Zone Warfare. The world around you does have a lot of visual clutter, but after about an hour or so, your eyes kind of get trained to it and you can start identifying targets. It was very surreal being able to jump on your Little Bird at main base and then just travel to your quest destination and literally see thousands of meters all around you. The mountains in the back, you could actually go to it without a loading screen, and you could see anything that was happening between you and that location. That was very cool. It made you feel like you were actually in a world and not just a video game. But honestly, when it comes to graphics, I feel like the environment was far better looking than the characters, the gear, the weapons, all the type of stuff that you're going to be interacting with every single time you go out and try to do quests. Your character model, to be honest, looks a little chunky, and whenever they do run, it honestly just kind of looks like they have to go to the bathroom. The character models are just a little bit funky. They feel very stiff whenever they're holding their weapons, and you also feel floaty whenever you move around. It's a little bit immersion breaking being in this beautiful world and then seeing your character hold your weapon at a high ready without any movement at all as you almost spacesuit jump like you're on a moon bounce over a fence. It doesn't feel right, and even after 10 hours of playing, it just kept bringing me out of the immersion of the world that I know the devs tried so hard to bring me in. In that same line, the gunplay also felt very stiff, I think is the best way to put it. If you've ever played Ground Branch or maybe the alpha or beta versions of Ready or Not, that is a very similar feeling of the gunplay when you're actually playing Gray Zone Warfare. Now, I don't want to say that this gunplay is inherently a huge negative. I understand that a lot of tactical shooter enjoyers are okay with this style of gunplay, if you can even call it that, because the world around them, the other hardcore tactical mechanics, make up for it. However, I do want to just very clearly reiterate that your gunplay experience, and if you are looking for a Tarkov competitor, it's not like Tarkov, it's not like Squad, it's not like Call of Duty, it really feels like Ground Branch and old school Ready or Not. If you don't like that, and if you don't like Arma 3, you're probably not going to enjoy the gunplay in Gray Zone Warfare. However, one thing that you might really enjoy is the weapon modification. It looks pretty much copy and paste from Tarkov. Obviously, there are some differences, but if you want to build a weapon, if you want to buy items from vendors, well, you can do that all here. And although Gray Zone Warfare doesn't have things like link search and weapon presets that Tarkov has, if we're being honest, Tarkov didn't have that for the longest time. The base mechanics of weapon building is here, and it felt very rewarding. And while we're looking at the menus, the vendors, the gear, the main base UI, all of this feels so much cleaner and less clunky than something like Tarkov's menu simulator. It just felt very fluid. I could chat with my buddies, press tab, quickly buy something from the vendor, build a weapon, drop something on the ground for my buddy if he wants it, take a look at my quest, open the map. You could do so much from this main base. And it also made the main base feel like a real-world MMO hub. If you've ever played MMOs like World of Warcraft on day ones of updates or server openings, this is really what it felt like for the first hour or so of Gray Zone Warfare. Everything was buzzing, little birds were taking off, people were chatting and just trying to move out and take care of their quests. It was a really cool feeling, and it was so much better than just staring at a blank menu that you do in a game like Tarkov. However, for all the good that is being done with the UI menus and the vendors and the actual task accepting, collecting, turning in progression, the quests themselves are absolutely exhausting. The majority of quests are more or less fetch quests. You have to go into town, find something, and then bring it back. This isn't inherently bad, but when you have to go to the same locations over and over again, it just wears on the players. There is very little differentiation between the actual quest gameplay loop. You go on a little bird, you take off at an LZ, you fight through the city, you get the item, you come back, and after that, the vendor says, great, now do it again, only this time go to the building right next to it. It feels very frustrating, but more importantly, there is no real significant reward for doing it. Despite doing 10 hours of questing, I really never felt like I had any meaningful weapon unlocks, character progressions, or any good rewards for the investment that I just did. And on top of that, as you start doing these repetitive quests and you're not really getting rewarded for it, the quest text, the flavor text, actually starts to feel even more vague as time goes on, meaning that you're going to spend a long time wandering around the city trying to find a shed that looks like every single other shed literally across the whole town.
How about at 173, 112? Oh, like way.
Yeah.
Okay, I got my
What's the southeast part of town? I would not consider that part of our town.
True. Okay, then I'll just go myself. How about that?
You.
Now, as frustrating as it was, I do have to admit it was really cool having to read flavor text and find something out by myself. It threw me back to World of Warcraft, the original World of Warcraft, before guides, before YouTube videos, before even ThoughtBot. I know I'm probably dating myself by saying ThoughtBot, but it was really nice to just be able to explore the world because it is a very beautiful world, and just learn about the city, try to find these locations without being told exactly where things were, and also without having to feel like I have to do a meta weapon or pick a meta route to get in and out quickly to get some cool reward. That was a huge breath of fresh air, but unfortunately, after about an hour or two of doing these same exact things over and over again, that fresh air was gone. I was exhausted, I was tired, and I really was just kind of forcing myself to get through it so that way I could see if the story was worth all of the progression that I was trying to complete. And unfortunately, I don't think it was. I'm not going to spoil anything, but at the moment, there's a bunch of bad guys. They're in the town and they're stealing supplies, and you're trying to kind of restore order. As I was doing these quests, I could actually see players on the map decide to give up and literally run towards the other enemy faction's base so that way they could get some PvP combat. Now, I understand that these starting quests are essentially a tutorial for new players. You want to have players from the main base get their experience in a gray zone in a relatively controlled PvE environment. I understand that. I understand the idea that the devs are going for in getting people invested into the game in a relatively safe and controlled manner, but this just was not it. The whole experience was exhausting, and I don't think we've even really talked about the combat. Yes, the gunplay feels very rigid and feels very stiff, but the combat itself in Gray Zone Warfare against AI is absolutely dreadful. The AI in game unfortunately don't seem to have any difference from what we saw in either trailers or other early access previews. They either stand around and watch their buddies get shot right in front of their eyes, or they kind of 360 no-scope one-shot kill you. It is such a frustrating experience, and at the end of the day, this realistic medical system that they've implemented where you actually have apparently the correct literage of blood, bullet ballistics go through your body supposedly in a very realistic way, it just felt anything but realistic. Shirtless bandits taking 5.56 rounds to their thorax or head and just kind of twitching and then one-shotting you feels very, very bad. At certain times, I felt like I understood it. I got good headshots, a controlled burst from the thorax up into the head would knock someone down, but then other times, that same type of combat would result in the AI just shrugging it off and shooting back at me. Gray Zone Warfare has been pushed by the devs as primarily a PvE game. Now, whether you want to accept that or not is beside the point. You can get PvP, and there is PvP. I took part in it, but primarily, Gray Zone Warfare at its core is a co-op PvE game with a little bit of VP. PvE VP, right? Focus on the VE. And if the PvE experience, if your combat versus AI is not there, then the vast majority of your gameplay loop is just not going to be fun. Not only were the AI bullet spongy, but because you have this very realistic and detailed medical system and bullet ballistics and how they interact with your body, whenever you did get hit, it really put you out of the fight. You had to break away from combat quite frequently, and although that is also not inherently a bad thing, since if you got hit, you want to take care of that problem, the detailed and cumbersome medical system just put you so far out of the fight, while the AI would just run around like nothing happened to them. Once again, this is inherently kind of cool, but because the AI just start to swarm you and act like computer players with no care in the world for themselves, it gets very, very frustrating just being overwhelmed time and time again, while you have to do critical medical things to just make yourself stop swaying around, coughing, limping, whatever the side effects, because you have a lot of side effects, and it gets very difficult to do that. It's interesting though, the medical system was very exhausting having to do it on yourself when you were in one-on-one or one-on whoever many AI combat, but whenever you had a buddy and they were downed and in a coma, that's when the medical system really shined. It was really cool seeing your buddy go down, hear him gasping for breath, you can examine him, see what's the problem, and patch him up and he's good to go. It's very different than something like Tarkov, where if you load in as a 4-stack, you lose a couple people, well, you're kind of out of the game for 20-30 minutes while they finish the raid. If for whatever reason you can't actually get them out of that coma, they can just hop on the next little bird and meet you back at location. That part is very, very cool for teamwork. It's very great for progression with buddies, and more importantly, it's just great for people to have friends and play with all sorts of skill levels. In games like Tarkov, you might not want to bring your buddy who's a lower level, who has lower gear, who has lower experience, because that can get you killed and then you lose everything. But in Gray Zone Warfare, you literally just take the next bird out, you see them in a few minutes, they grab their gear, you're good to go. Also, if you want to just exfil real quickly, maybe you want to turn in a really important quest item, maybe you got some good loot, maybe you just need to take a bio break in a safe spot, you can call that little bird just for yourself, get on it, go back to the main base, take another little bird out, and meet up with your buddies later. This kind of in and out experience in the open world is very cool, it's very clever, and I really enjoyed being able to do that. And on top of that, these landing zones that you would actually be dropped off on, You do get them unlocked from quest progression, but if you just wandered around at a location where a LZ actually was, it would now be discovered and permanently on your map, so you could bring yourself or even players who have never been to that LZ to the current one, and you now have a new destination. I thought this was a very nice way to encourage discovery and player exploration without punishing a player from going out to middle of nowhere and then having to run all the way back, or maybe leave the game and potentially lose all of their gear since they're not safely back at the main base. However, a huge downside of this exploration is that looting in general felt very boring. You can't loot computers, you can't loot file cabinets, you can't loot the vast majority of furniture in game. It just felt very empty, both inside and outside. Every once in a while you run into a weapons crate and you might see a magazine or, maybe an AK or something, but it just wasn't really exciting, and after a few hours I actually just stopped looking entirely since I would get the same repetitive, very boring loot, and the only time I'd actually purposely seek out anything was if I needed to top off my hydration or energy with some sort of drink or an energy bar. In saying that, however, there's one thing I'd like to praise the devs for doing, and that is in regards to keys. There are quite a few locked buildings in Gray Zone Warfare that you can explore just for the sake of it, or that are required for task and quest progression. However, unlike other games, you don't have to just search the entire world for these keys. It appears that the keys are actually on the loot table of enemies that are within that immediate area. For example, we had to find some information in a pharmacy or doctor's office, and after finally finding the correct building, we realized it was locked and looted a few of the bodies nearby and realized the key was right there. This happened frequently across the map, next to the restaurant, next to the lumberyard, next to the UN building. It was very, very refreshing to not have to spend hours and hours searching for that one key just to progress your character and get on with the game. Now, when you take everything into consideration, when you're playing with a 4-man squad, it isn't necessarily a bad game because you're hanging out with your buddies. And I feel like whenever you play with friends, you can be okay with bad, unenjoyable, boring, time-consuming games because you're hanging out with your buddies. You're chatting, you're having fun. Someone dies, it's funny. You kind of get on with it. And although there are definitely moments in here where I am having fun in combat, there are also plenty of moments where I just feel like that combat loop with my buddies was not enjoyable at all. At one point, I was pushing up to clear some enemies. I shot a shirtless, helmetless guy in the face. He one-shot me, and whenever my buddies cleared the area and they tried to revive me, I actually got revived into a building. This glitched me into a building, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not get out. I eventually had to get team killed again so I could respawn, but going back out to get my body, I died along the way, and my body with all my original loot on it that was stuck near the building disappeared. It was a real horrible feeling trying to kill AI, which should have died, getting killed by that AI, and then my buddy doing the promoted gameplay loop of interacting with me, using the health system, healing me appropriately, and then getting sucked into a building and ultimately losing about an hour and a half of loot and progression. And I understand glitches are going to happen. I understand it's an alpha, but there wasn't enough very fun and rewarding gameplay before that moment and after that moment to make me get over it. And this is also just talking about duos, trios, and a 4-man squad. We haven't even discussed solo combat, which is absolutely impossible. Now, impossible might be exaggerating a bit, but it is so unbearably unfun to do solo progression that I think the only players who are doing it are forcing themselves to do it from a pure content point. It is not fun, it is grindy, and because of the AI bullet sponges, you literally go through hundreds and hundreds of ammo. I literally swapped from my M4 to another M4 to an AK to an AKM to an SKS to pistols. I used hundreds of ammunition just to try to get through an area to find one quest item. It was exhausting. I had already run around this map for 5 hours. I had already been to these locations. I had already killed all these people, and I had to do it all again over and over again. It was like a horrible episode of Groundhog Day, and it just wasn't fun. The combat at its core was not fun enough for me to want to do it. Because of how Gray Zone Warfare treats quest progression, treats combat, treats exploration, a solo player experience is going to be very difficult. I understand if you want to try it, but I cannot recommend this game at all if you are only going to play it by yourself. It is not fun, it is exhausting, it is time consuming, and ultimately there is no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's no huge great reward for just exhausting yourself in trying to complete this stuff. And that brings us to the PvP experience of Gray Zone Warfare. At its core, once again, I need to reiterate this because I feel like players think Gray Zone Warfare is a PvP game with a little bit of PvE. Somewhere along the line of development, people got it in their heads that this was going to be a recreation and reimagining of Escape from Tarkov and take Tarkov's place as the perfect PvE and PvP experience. It was really funny. After the first hour or two of playing, you could actually see people on your map stop questing and instead start to push around to the enemy factions areas just so they can try to shoot enemy players and not computers. Nobody cared anymore about doing any tasks. They didn't care about quests. There's no point to do it. So to get that taste of PvP, you really had to force it. And players would spend upwards of 10 minutes running across the map, trying to unlock or discover landing zones so they can get closer to the enemy faction's starting area. And I don't want to say pushing into the starting area is necessarily griefing, but it was very, very forced PvP. At the start of the game, there is no PvP. And if you do get PvP, you really went out of your way to get it. I think it took to maybe level 8 or 9 until you actually got a quest that brought you up to the enemy's area with a landing zone where you could then drop and potentially run into enemy faction players. Let's be real. You can get into PvP combat, but the vast majority of PvP combat is hearing an enemy little bird coming around and then pushing to the landing zone and shooting players trying to exfil or infill. I had a buddy who had a quest on the north side of the map, so I jumped in his little bird, we deployed, and we started going through the town, but almost immediately we heard an enemy little bird arrive, so we could check the map and see that there was no friendlies anywhere near us. We booked it back to the little bird, and I ultimately was able to kill one. But after that, I was immediately team killed by my buddy. Yes, maybe he should have had some situational awareness of where I was coming from, and we had visually seen enemies and so on. But the point of the matter is, Gray Zone Warfare has no positive ID in the game. You can't wear an armband. You can't wear different color shirts. There's literally nothing different between the factions other than the name. It's actually pretty funny since during character creation, you literally pick your character, you pick his outfit, and then you pick your faction. So at its core, you are going to look like everyone else. The starting weapons are all the same too. Everything is the same. The gear, the outfit, the player models, there's no difference. And so in a game where you're supposed to potentially run into other players at times, you have to instead press tab, verify that that enemy is an enemy and not a blue dot, and then engage. Or you can accidentally shoot a buddy, and I unfortunately did that in our first engagement since I didn't realize who was who, and it just kind of sucks.
Is someone at the gate? Is someone at the gate?
I just came around. I have a knife. Are you guys not outside the gate?
No.
Oh, there's two guys out here looting my body. Those are faction members, though. Faction members. Faction members.
Hello?
Sorry, guys.
On top of that, this co-op game has, unless I completely missed it, no radio system. There's no squad chat, and the only VoIP you can use is local proximity VoIP, but it has a 15-second timer. You can only talk or hold down the VoIP button for 15 seconds before the game literally puts you on a VoIP cooldown. It is so difficult to try to have conversations in-game that we just resort to Discord since I don't want to deal with this horrible restriction. You can't have a tactical shooter co-op game and not allow players to communicate with themselves. 90% of the tactical shooter experience is working with your buddies, and there is a weird restriction on this that the only thing that makes sense is that they saw that Tarkov has a VoIP cooldown and they implemented it as well. But let's get back to the PvP real quick. The PvP devolved from pushing up to the enemy PvE areas, like their actual starting faction areas, and instead turned into just landing zone camping. Now, honestly, I don't know how this can be prevented because these landing zones are cross-faction. You can't have a Mithras security detachment for when I want to deploy here with my squad, because what if between our helicopter ride, what if another faction deploys their little bird? Are they going to land and then get shot by the AI that is there to protect players that aren't even there yet? It's a weird loop, and players are just going to get griefed over and over again. And even in a VIP streamer YouTuber event, players were literally just resorting to LZ camping. Players had to hop servers because they couldn't quest progress, and it just devolved into madness. I will say there was one moment we got into contact with some really good PvP, and that was cut short because the game just has some really awkward game mechanics. After I got back to landing zone, picked up my gear, my buddy and I kept walking out to that compound to continue his quest. However, we then heard another little bird push to a nearby landing zone and assumed it was the two players that we had originally killed. They dismounted and we could hear gunfire getting closest to us, so we realized we're about to have an actual 2-on-2 PvP engagement, and that was pretty exciting. But the moment we started doing that, AI and their sponginess just kind of ruined it. We had AI come up behind, we couldn't kill them properly because they're using all of our ammo without dying, and then the most frustrating thing is the weapon animation or eating animation or health animation locks. Once you start that animation, you cannot double tap left click like you can in Tarkov to cancel it, and instead you are locked into it. So after I got shot, I was trying to use a painkiller. The moment I started the painkiller animation, an AI came up right from behind me and put me into a coma. That was super frustrating. It kind of ruined the moment. But what's also important to know is that because it's so easy to redeploy to a current location and know where players who maybe you just fought or died to, you kind of still know that they're right there. You're not going to really get into what I feel are genuine PvP moments a lot of the time. It's going to be people literally going back to exactly where you fought and just trying to sneak up on you because they know you're right there. It's a very weird engagement. It just feels very odd. Nothing feels important because you can just literally go back. And at the moment, the gear was so bad that even if you did kill someone, you literally just left it on the ground. Nobody cared. There was nothing that gave you the thrill of the same type of PvP that you would have in something like Tarkov. At the end of the day, if you like Tarkov, you're not going to like this. If you do not like Arma PvE missions, you're probably not going to like this. This is very much like Arma PvE with buddies. It can be fun. There are moments of really cool combats, but it is so few and far between that it's very hard for me to want to play it. I described it as a neutral feeling, which isn't super negative since I do see a lot of potential that Greyzone offers. The PvP is kind of there, but it's a shell. If they lean hard into the PvP, it could actually be a pretty fun game, but they need to lean hard into it, and I don't think they're going to since it is PvE focused. It being PvE focused is a problem when the PvE progression is not fun at all, the PvE rewards are kind of useless, and the PvE combat isn't there. PvE does not feel fun. The world, for as beautiful as it is, feels kind of pointless to explore at times, and it can just be frustratingly unfun. The devs unfortunately need to fundamentally change character progression. You need to fundamentally change AI PvE combat because it isn't fun at all. Saying that you have the most advanced ballistics and medical system doesn't hold any weight when I can literally see shirtless bandits taking multiple 5.56 rounds to their thorax and then one-shotting me through armor and killing me. That isn't fun. It isn't immersive, it isn't tactical, and at the end of the day, if I lost access to this game literally right now, I would move on with my life and not even think anything of it. It is an okay game, but an okay game in this stage in this environment of games being released every few months is probably not going to hold any weight when it comes to an actual full release. I wouldn't be surprised if this game is very successful in its niche, not unlike a Ground Branch or a Ready or Not, but this huge, overwhelmingly groundbreaking game that has been hyped up for months, I'm not seeing it. And if I'm wrong, please tell me. But after 10 hours, I don't see any point of playing it anymore. If I want to do some PvP, I'll go play other games to do PvP, and I don't want to force myself into a loop that is fundamentally shunning PvP combat and forcing me into unfun PvE mechanics. Now, that was a lot. I understand there's going to be people in the comments that say, Moi, it's an alpha game. Why are you being so hard of it? That's the point of an alpha, to be hard on it, to give real constructive criticism. And I think if I just say that this game is great because it looks great and I had some fun with some buddies and I shot a dude, I'm not having fun. And I can't honestly pretend that I'm having fun. And the devs, if they really want to be successful in this game, I think they really need to take a hard look at some of these systems and change them. But that doesn't mean I'm going to write it off. Just because I think it's not that fun and exhausting and tiring doesn't mean that I don't think it can fundamentally change if the devs do a good job fixing it. But they have to listen to the community first. But anyway, that's it for me. Let me know what you guys think of Gray Zone Warfare, and if there are any points you agree or disagree with. Drop me a like if you did like the video, subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you guys in the next one. But that's it for me. Until next time, peace.